because it's like he's hollow from inside. You can't have morals if you don't have a self. I wanted to talk about the fact that I actually made this video before I watched season 3. I've recently watched season 3, so this video is only about the season 1 and season 2. Also, yeah, this first video barely gives away any spoilers. Hope you like it. Stay tuned until the end for a full elaboration of Joe's character. Thanks for watching. You is a haunting show. Its premise is disturbing in and of itself. I mean, you have a hero of the classic rom-com who loves the woman dearly, but beneath the facade of this ideal romance is a trail of obsession and addiction going on, which leads to the main character of the show, Joe Goldberg, foregoing all considerations of boundaries, stalking his lovers around, stealing her private belongings, like,
I'll even do your laundry.
which is ew, and covertly and secretly trying to control all her actions. I remember the first time I was introduced to the show and my initial perception was, wow, creepy stuff coming on. Woohoo! I couldn't wait to sink my teeth into it. Gradually, I got very attached to it. You see, I'd been alone for a long time. I wasn't really watching a show. I preferred my solitude. A show would come along and then I would just drop it. But this show was different. I got very attached to it. I became obsessive about it and wanted to remain connected to it all the time. So I decided I had to save you. So what is this show about? The show follows the story of Joe Goldberg, who is a bookstore manager in New York, where he stumbles upon his writerly romantic interest, Beck, and sparks off an obsessive relationship with her. He even steals her phone, keeps tabs on her, tries to accompany her every moment of her life and tries to gain information about every single thing going on in her life. As their story progresses, they try to overcome multiple challenges. Without letting her know, Joe commits a number of crimes and murders in the name of protecting her. And eventually, let's just say the season ends on an interesting note. There are also allusions to abusive relationship dynamics outside of the main relationships, in the form of Paco and his mother, who is abused by her husband. The first season is followed by the second season, wherein a new love interest appears, whose name is literally Love. She's a more giving counterpart to Joe's ex. Joe now moves to Los Angeles and lies about what his identity is. He forges an entirely new identity for himself and calls himself Will. But Love turns out to be a more persistent partner who gets Joe to open up despite his visible hesitation in the beginning. This, I would say, is the gist of the show. So the burning question a lot of viewers develop about the show is, what's wrong with this guy? And a lot of theories circulate the internet. So this insider article diagnoses Joe with narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and codependency at the same time, which I find to be a laughing joke because codependency and narcissism are at the opposing ends of the spectrum. Although the article seems to wrap up these contradictions nicely in the last section, but still, it would seem that jumping to the conclusion that Joe is a heartless, antisocial narcissist is a common reaction of viewers, although I find it to be quite paradoxical. What I would argue is actually wrong with him is codependency. Lots and lots of it sprinkled deep into his subconscious mind. which is why as soon as he finds a woman he's actually deeply interested in, he loses himself, mind, body, soul. The purpose of his life becomes this other woman, and saving her his life mission. So, you know, this show is like a romantic comedy, except with a very sinister reality that making someone else your world can actually be pretty gory. I think an important point which brings this argument home is the internal monologue of the characters. So in the first season we get a glimpse into, of course, Joe's internal monologue and Beck's internal monologue, and there is a stark contrast, people. So, you know, in a certain episode, I've forgotten the number, so you'll just see it here on the screen. So like in that episode, Beck's internal monologue is shown as she's just using the pronoun I a lot. So a lot of her thoughts are about herself, which is what most normal people think about. So, you know, she's bashing herself a lot. She's being very self-critical, which is interesting.
Beck, you're a disaster.
And, you know, it's a very self-absorbed kind of pity. But on the other hand, Joe does not use I a lot. You know, that specific word can tell you a lot about a person. He does not use I a lot. To a disturbing extent, actually. Most of his thoughts are referenced towards Beck, towards, you know, trying to understand her, trying to analyze her actions, what this relationship is about. His thoughts are like directly tied up to this relationship, and specifically to this other person, not really to what he needs or like what he wants in his own, from his own self, but he's just trying to really know her in every possible way, and like who she hangs out with, even, you know, really like embarrassing details like who her sexual partners are. In really private acts, he's trying to know her down to the core, and so he's not really focused on himself at all. Joe, in fact, tries to get to know Beck in a way he does not even know himself. And thus there's like an utter erasure of his own self, an utter denial of his own self as an entity existing outside of this relationship dynamic with Beck. And this is what heavily codependent person in a codependent relationship looks like. So what is codependency? Codependency is characterized by excessive emotional and psychological reliance on an individual, typically one who needs help. Think about that. It's kind of what the show is about. A codependent person is very self-sacrificing, and they have dysfunctional relationship patterns. Span and Fisher have described codependency as a condition characterized by an extreme focus outside of self, lack of open expression of feelings, and attempts to derive a sense of purpose through relationships. The toxicity which Joe is dealing with is just so invisible that the people who are closest to him, which are his girlfriends, they actually think, hey, he's so good for them, so nice, and he's so amazing. Like, that's what they think, but they don't know what's going on, that he's batshit obsessive and he's losing himself and like blah 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 blah. The primary and most important symptom of codependency is a weak sense of self and the utter loss of self when he enters into a relationship with the women he chooses. So this is definitely an act of agency because he chooses these women, so it could be like a volitional giving up of his self, but in the midst of the show you see how much he's struggling with himself. Like, sometimes he really doesn't want to choose this woman, but it's just like his impulses just drag himself to this woman who's really bad for him.
But the world is twisted and unfair, and let's face it, I'm no good for you.
While watching the show, I always got the impression that Joe does not seem like a whole person. If other people are opaque, Joe is translucent. He's like a compressed version of himself. Not like very well rounded or whole. Oh, that's because of the self-neglect pervasive in his life and in the myriad ways in which he abandons himself to get love from outside of himself. He doesn't have a comprehensive network of friends or family relationships in his life. In fact, he's got like nothing in that area, you know. He doesn't have a confidant to call upon, to confide in, or a parent he can trust, though obviously we can't blame him for that. He doesn't have a circle. He doesn't have a circle of relationships outside of this one relationship. He seems to suggest, at least, that friends are really, they tell you a lot about a person's personality, and he keeps a keen eye on his girlfriend's friends, but he doesn't really have any friends. And you know, he works in a bookstore, he loves books, that's it. He's not really ambitious, he doesn't really want to build a career, he doesn't really want to take his life forward in a certain direction. He's not really working on his dreams, you know. He doesn't even have a lot of hobbies or sports he likes. There's not really much to, you know, give him that holistic personality, which, you know, his girlfriends usually do have. He is not whole, and that's a weak sense of self for you. But you know, this might indicate that the writers didn't do a good enough job. They didn't beef his personality up enough, but I don't think that that's what it's about. I would in fact say that the biggest strength of the show is its characterization. I was absolutely fascinated by the characters in this show. They're so nuanced, so complex, they're like really messed up, which is interesting. And I also really loved the contrast you can see between the characters. You can tell that that's a thought by Joe, you can tell that's a thought by Beck. Definitely I would give full points for the characterization, but it's intentional. That's what it feels like. It's intentional that Joe does not have a strong personality because he ain't got that much of a self, you know. Joe does not have a strong sense of self because he is utterly fixated with trying to fill this void carried over from childhood, that of love. And he thinks that the only way to do that is to obsess with a romantic interest to the detriment of everything else that he could possibly have done in his life, even though his goalposts are flexible.
So close, but worlds away. I will figure out a way to get to you.
So, in summary, his loss of self involves making himself utterly invisible to other people and also to himself, because he barely thinks about himself, he barely analyzes his own patterns, like what he needs, what his desires are. He really prioritizes himself last, and all of his energy is directed outward toward understanding other people and like what they really mean, what they really want from him, what they expect from him. You know, though of course we really have to iterate and reiterate that the ways through which he tries to understand other people are pretty messed up. It's not okay to go into somebody else's house, to like steal their things. It's absolutely not okay, because I just have a feeling someone's gonna be like, oh, I'm trying to defend him. I'm not. He's very creepy in a lot of ways, and it makes you very uncomfortable. Like, get your hands off her bra. Is it a bra or is it a panty? Like, get your hands off her lingerie. What a creep! You just have to admit, he's still pretty selfless, and he neglects himself, and he makes himself invisible. That's why he thinks that it's even okay to do these things. Though, you know, I will have to admit, like, Joe is very confusing. Even as a viewer, he's kind of confusing to understand, really. Apart from that, he obviously does not care about his mental or physical health.
Keep losing your enemies because you're so goddamn out of shape.
I mean, he goes to freaking therapy where he cons his identity, by the way, or like switches his identity, by the way. And you know, he would really benefit from therapy. Joe, I really would like to ask you, go get therapy. But you know, He gets therapy because he wants to fuel his suspicion of the story that he's created, that Beck might be cheating on him with her therapist. That's why he goes to therapy, not to improve himself. He doesn't care about improving himself. He doesn't care about like building his own career or something, which is actually paradoxical considering how good he is for the careers of the women he dates, while he doesn't care about his own career at all. His identity is also not solid and concrete, and he does not seem to be settled into it well. That is why it's very easy for him to pretend to be someone that he's not. His attempts to gain love involve frequent self-betrayals and compromising his self. This is shown by how easy it is for him to lie in order to maintain harmony with other people. He's constantly lying throughout the series. Again, lying is not good, kids. Don't do it. But like, this really shows how easy it is for him to compromise his own truth in order to maintain harmony with other people. Also, as for his identity, he can change his name, he can move to another city, but he's still kind of the same person. Like, he's changing names, he's conning a new identity, still he's like the same person because nothing about him seems to be changed or anything. It's because of how transparent he is, and his behaviors are very self-effacing and inauthentic to himself. He also rarely talks about himself. If you think about it, like in his conversations with other people, he's not really talking about himself a lot, except if it helps to make somebody else comfortable, like when love has to face physical abuse at the hands of a parent. He shares that he has had similar experiences in his childhood, so it's to make love comfortable, but not really someone to talk about himself a lot. He's like a mirror. Wherever he goes, whoever he hangs out with, he's like a mirror to them, and they see in him whatever they want to, because it's like he's hollow from inside. If we're talking about his loss of self, I find this scene quite interesting. Peach has whisked Beck away to this giant mansion, and Joe has of course followed Beck because he has got to keep tabs on her to make sure that she's not putting herself in danger and to make sure that she's safe. And it's like both Joe and Peach want to obtain Beck, and so there's the scene where Beck is in the bathtub and Peach is ogling at her from the sidelines, which is gross, creepy. Joe sees that. Joe does have a sense of what right and wrong is, and so he sees it. He condemns Peach. He's literally standing behind Peach, staring at Beck while she's taking a bath, and he's just like, oh my god, Peach is obsessive, she's invading your privacy, obviously you're like doing really gross stuff, like looking at you while you're taking a bath, even though he's doing the same thing. He has made himself so invisible to his own perception that he cannot see the morality behind his own actions. It's only about other people. He's not thinking about the rightness or wrongness of his own actions in relation to Beck, which is like really interesting. You can't have morals if you don't have a self. He's no better than Peach. In that scene, he's like trying to protect Beck. He's condemning Peach. He's no better than Peach. He's in fact worse. He has read Beck's chats. He's seen her like having sex with her partner. He has like, stolen her lingerie. We must come to this again and again because it's just so creepy. But he acts like he's doing the right thing because he's not thinking about himself at all. And so most of the time he treats himself like he does not exist. He treats himself like he's not even a human being.